Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Film Brits podcast. I'm your host Trilbee, otherwise known as the King Kong of film criticism, and I'm here today to talk about stop motion animated movies. But first we've got a few segments to talk about first before we get to that. If you are a regular listener or viewer of this podcast, whether or not you're listening to this on SoundCloud or on iTunes, which you can subscribe to me and rate me on iTunes, or you can subscribe to my YouTube channel Trilbee Reviews, you will know from the title of this video that I'm talking about stop motion animated movies in the wake of watching Kubo and the Two Strings, Leica Animation's latest incredibly brilliant masterpiece. And now after seeing that film, I just want to talk about all things stop motion, and that also extends to our beginning topic, which is the regular first topic of this podcast, share the love, because the internet is a terrible, horrible place sometimes, as proven over the past week or two, especially online. So let's just share some love to Lee Hardcastle. Now, if you have not heard of Lee Hardcastle, it's likely that you've at least watched one or two of his films. He is a stop motion animator who created the Pingu Thing crossover, and if you've not seen it, where have you been? But basically, what's it called? It's like Thingu or something, and it's basically a crossover between Pingu, the stop-motion animated puppet who is absolutely adorable, and the Thing movie by John Carpenter. It sounds just as amazing as I'm making it sound. Basically, Pingu plays Kurt Russell's role in The Thing. He's the one who does the blood test. He sets everyone on fire, and it's all claymation, all stop motion, and it's just one of the most surreal things you could ever possibly watch. But Lee Hardcastle's been doing stop motion animation on YouTube and online and on Vimeo and websites for years. He's done The Exorcist in claymation, Eraserhead in claymation. He's done crossovers between The Simpsons and You're Next, and he's found gory ways to kill minions. He's combined Frozen with The Thing, and he's done some work for 20th Century Fox, Adult Swim. He's got a website, he's got a YouTube channel, a Twitter and Instagram. I'll put details to that all in the description below. Just check out his incredibly funny work. He's a really nice guy as well. I actually met him very briefly at HorrorCon in Sheffield last year. Got to meet him. He had all the figurines for the Pingu Thing crossover as well, which looked awesome in person, and he just seemed like a really nice guy. So Lee Hardcastle, you do some great fun stop motion work, and hopefully you folks will go check him out after listening to this podcast. Now let's get to the feature presentation just for fun. Let's talk about my top 5 stop motion movies. Now, stop motion it's something I personally have an affinity towards, because it's not just something that it's not just a fun form of animation. It's not just a unique form of telling stories, but it is a way to just sort of create and craft worlds. And I think literally doing it being able to go to certain events and being able to see, say, Wallace and Gromit, or being able to see the Kurt Russell Pingu, I think there's something especially magical about that. I think no matter how good stop motion gets, no matter how much green screen, how advanced green screen and all these technologies get, there's something wonderful. Can't talk about the tactile aspect of stop motion, or just sets or costumes in general. It's one reason why I love going to the Harry Potter studio tour as opposed to, I don't know, the Hunger Games fashion show, because the Hunger Games doesn't really have anything unique about its world apart from the costumes. That's why the only thing that the Hunger Games creators and the producers or whatever in the studio can do is just get all of the costumes from the Hunger Games and showcase them. Whereas with, say, Harry Potter, you can see all the sets, all the props, all the worlds, or everything about this world has been built and handcrafted, and you can see it. And stop motion has that wonderful aspect about it. Sure, you can get some crossover, for example, say with Toy Story, you can buy a Woody toy, but that is not the same Woody that you've seen on screen, and that Woody cannot do the things that your Woody toy can do. It's just something magical about it, and just knowing that people have been moving these claymation or Lego figures or whatever, plasticine or 3D printed objects, able to just move them frame by frame by frame. For example, in Kubo and the Two Strings, there's a sequence on a boat where the monkey and one of the sisters, played by Rooney Mara, they're fighting each other on this boat in the middle of a storm, and the boat is collapsing around them. Apparently that took 19 months to shoot. 19 months for what's like a 3 or 4 minute sequence. That's absolutely astounding, and stop motion animation has been around since nearly the dawn of the medium. Even if they weren't solely stop motion films, their origins are there in films like King Kong, where King Kong is a stop motion creation, and you've got all of these monster movies from the 40s and 50s where Ray Harryhausen was really the pioneer for it, where he would You'd shoot footage of these people running in terror, and then you'd have to overlay stop motion footage of a beast attacking, and then there'd be a third layer which has got like the foreground in it. Like, for example, if somebody's fighting, if a monster is terrorizing people underneath a bridge, you've got the background, you've got the monster under the bridge, and then you've got in front of the bridge where there are people running. It's so inventive. I love stop motion and everything that surrounds it and what it also brings to the table. And Aardman Animation are pretty much a British staple. Wallace and Gromit, and watching all of those films growing up, it's absolutely amazing. And it's kind of falling out of favour in favour of 3D animation. But stop motion films are still being made regularly, and it's Kubo and the Two Strings, and also films like Frankenweenie and Paranorman. And also this past week, one reason we're talking about stop motion is that Aardman released their first trailer for Early Man, which is going to star Eddie Redmayne as a caveman. And the teaser trailer was really short, didn't really show a lot, but it was really charming, and I'm really looking forward to Early Man in 2018. But let's talk about the past. Let's talk about my top 5 stop-motion animated movies. And number 5, I'm going to have to be going mainstream with these picks, unfortunately. I've not watched too many small, avant-garde, indie stuff, and also I'm going for theatrical, feature-length stuff. So when I told patrons that I was doing stop-motion movies, they said, Wallace and Gromit, The Wrong Trousers, and Wallace and Gromit Close Shave, or whatever. These are going to be theatrically released feature-length films. So, let's just dive right into number 5, The Nightmare Before Christmas. Not directed by Tim Burton, but directed by Henry Selick, who also worked on James and the Giant Peach, which has been remade in a couple of years by Sam Mendes. And he also directed Coraline. And just a really inventive talent. And him and Tim Burton's aesthetics really do fit together like two perfect pairs of gloves. And what's interesting is that this was created from Disney's much more mature branch, Touchstone Pictures. This was basically based off of a book by Tim Burton. Tim Burton wrote a book, he designed the characters. I actually own the book, I probably should have brought it out for this podcast, but it's basically about 35 pages, and it tells the exact same story as the Nightmare Before Christmas movie, which is an interesting staple of Halloween and Christmas viewing, because it's interesting, when do you start watching The Nightmare Before Christmas? Do you start watching it on Halloween, before Halloween, or is the window October 31st to December 25th? Is that the only window? Really, you can watch this all year round, or sing the songs all year round, but still. Nightmare Before Christmas, while yes, it's not exactly one of the most inventive in terms of the characters and in terms of their personalities or who these people are. The world that has been created by Henry Selick and his team, and also from the mind of Tim Burton, is one of the most strikingly original that you'll ever see in any film, regardless of stop motion or animation in general. And this film has had moments and vignettes just ingrained in the public lexicon, like just sequences such as Jack Skellington walking down the hill that's slowly unraveling at his feet in front of the full moon, in front of the pumpkin field. This is a moment that has just become part of popular culture, and it's one of the films where I think at 75 minutes long, it doesn't wear out its welcome at all. It's brief, it's brisk, it's straight in, straight out, and you have a really inventive world being inhabited. And I remember when I was young, I was about 5 or 6 years old. 5, 6 years old. This film came out in 1993, so it was making its rounds on TV for the first time. And my older brother and my 2 older cousins were like, Will, you've got to watch Nightmare Before Christmas. You ought to watch it, it's going to be really cool. And when Oogie Boogie showed up and they were kidnapping Santa Claus and torturing him or whatever they were doing, I just couldn't watch it. I left the room. I was way too young for this film. And I think when you're young, this is not for really young children. If you're maybe below the ages of 7, I personally would not let my kid watch this film unless they really, really wanted to, or unless I hated them and just really wanted to punish them. Because when you get right down to it, the plot of The Nightmare Before Christmas is really grim. Like, you've got this town of Halloween which embraces the macabre, the death, and all the gore and everything, and then they not only want to steal Christmas, they actually literally kidnap Santa Claus. They get rid of Christmas unwillingly. Jack Skellington doesn't deliberately get rid of Christmas, and the police are outside. No idea if you can hear the sirens, but anyway, they take Santa Claus, who's just this really jovial, really fun, picturesque personification of all that's joyful and happy about the holidays and human kindness. They literally kidnap him and take him to be tortured by them, a sack full of insects. It's really dark when you get right down to the nuts and bolts concept, but it still is able to appeal to a rather broad demographic. I think if anything doesn't work in the Nightmare Before Christmas, it's the love story between Jack Skellington and Sally, because Sally is really a nothing character. She does kind of feel like the token woman in this universe, and there's the whole aspect where Sally gives Jack Skellington the baskets, and that gets lifted up to his window, and then a few scenes later she's talking to him like a concerned friend as opposed to somebody who loves him or anything like that. And then at the end of the film, when Sally rescues Jack and then Jack says, "Oh, Sally, I can't believe I never realised," it's like, there's nothing really here. This is like Sally sung a song about how much she loves Jack, or like that she's got feelings for him, but there's nothing here from him. Like there's no reciprocation until the final moments of the film, to the relationship's detriment. But because the film is so brisk, it's just so short and been and gone that it really doesn't matter in the broad strokes of the story. What really is appealing is Jack as a character, and Jack, how he's so naive about whether or not Halloween and Christmas can really coexist so close to each other. There's a reason there's like nearly 2 months gap between Halloween and Christmas, and even then Bonfire Night is in between if you're from the UK. I don't really know. And also, isn't it Thanksgiving as well? There's a reason there are holidays between the two to separate them, folks. And also Oogie Boogie is a really fun villain as well, and the songs are great. This is Danny Elfman at the top of his game, and Danny Elfman also provides the singing voice for Jack Skellington, and my God, is he a great singer. He's a great singer. There were just some brilliant lines as well. Like every so often I just randomly start quoting Igor, like, "Master, the planes!" Like, just everything from, like, even if it's not an incredibly original or great line, the delivery and the character and the voice is just really, really fun. So yeah, number 5 in my top 5 favourite stop-motion animated movies is Henry Selick or Tim Burton's, whatever, The Nightmare Before Christmas. Now, number 4, let's go mainstream once again, unfortunately, to Chicken Run. Now, I actually remember watching Chicken Run in theatres in the year 2000. This was the very first feature-length film from Aardman Animation. Now, you often think, oh, Wallace and Gromit is their big thing, it's their big staple, it's their huge movie. That's not actually the case. Their first one was Chicken Run, and I think it's so interesting and novel that this was the first stop-motion film from them out of the gate. You'd think they'd go for something maybe a little bit safer, maybe something that was more in keeping with their past filmography, but no, they just went for Chicken Run, which is basically The Great Escape with chickens, and to this day it is still the highest grossing stop-motion animated film ever, which is once again surprising. You would think it'd be maybe something like Wallace and Gromit, or maybe something from Leica Animation, or maybe something like Tim Burton's Nightmare Before Christmas, but no, the highest grossing, most successful stop-motion animated film of all time is Chicken Run, and it's actually a great film as well. It is worthy of that acclaim, it is worthy of its success. And it is The Great Escape with chickens, but I do think it's just so fun and inventive, and how these chickens and these characters around them are so small, but they are in these these really tightly packed, detailed environments, like these chicken coops and this farm, which in keeping is just a small location. It's got a very, very small scope, but it feels big. It feels epic because these characters are so small. And you've got a character like Mrs. Tweedy, who is just one of the most delectable villains ever, played by Miranda Richardson. She is just a really fun villain, and one of the favourite moments of the film was when they're trying to escape. Throughout the film, she's got this really happy logo of her holding a chicken pie, and she's all smiling and happy in this picture, which is absolutely nothing like her. But at one moment, her face from the poster goes onto her face, and she has to tear it off, and underneath is just this really evil frown. And you've got Ginger, you've got Rocky, you've got these really fun supporting characters as well. You remember characters like Babs, you remember characters like Bunty, you remember Nick and Fetcher and Fowler and Mac. You remember these small characters. Once again, it's a short film, doesn't even make its way to 90 minutes. There's not a lot to say about Chicken Run, though. It's just a really charming film, and it is a sort of it is a cliche plot in that Mel Gibson plays a rooster who cannot he plays a cockerel. Sorry, he cannot fly, and he has to try and teach these chickens to fly because there's a misunderstanding that they see him flying over the chicken fence and they think this person can fly, he's going to teach us how to fly and how to get out of this chicken farm, and obviously it's going to have to come out eventually that he is unable to fly and that he's been lying to them this whole time. But then they decide, you know what, we're still going to fly out of here, we're going to build a massive machine out of our chicken coop and make it fly, it's going to grow wings, we've got a ramp, we're going to go over. It's so fun how it just embraces the ridiculousness of the concept. And the Great Escape, people escaping from a prison, it's not an inherently silly concept. But then you put chickens in there, escaping from a chicken farm, and the comedy and the visual jokes they write themselves. So that is number 2, Aardman Animation, directed by Peter Lord and Nick Park, Chicken Run, the most successful stop-motion animated film of all time. Now for number 3, we're going to be going maybe a little bit more avant-garde, I guess, maybe something a little bit more indie. Let's go for Fantastic Mr. Fox, directed by Wes Anderson. Now, as someone who grew up loving the Roald Dahl book, I think that Fantastic Mr. Fox is not a great adaptation of the book. I love the book. I think it's a really clever book about how this smart fox is able to outwit and outsmart these 3... Boris Bunsenbean is able to just outwit these characters from underneath their very feet. I think that's a really clever concept, and it's written so sharply and so well. And I also remember just listening to an audio cassette of it. That was my main exposure to it. This audio cassette, and I remember vividly some of the voices they put on for the characters and the story, and it's also star-studded. Speaking of voices, you've got George Clooney, you've got Meryl Streep, Bill Murray, Willem Dafoe, Jason Schwartzman, Owen Wilson. Wes Anderson has even got a small role in the film as a weasel who's underneath one of the farms. It takes the nuts and bolts of the story, and then Wes Anderson just sort of runs with it, and just it's the same story if you just read the synopsis, but many of the details are different, and of course his own aesthetic is really interesting. These weird angular shots, and just the way he shoots his live action movies, like the Grand Budapest Hotel, which is I think a really great style over substance movie, but I do still really appreciate the film. And films like The Royal Tenenbaums and Moonrise Kingdom, despite Fantastic Mr. Fox being this much more family friendly story and stop motion, it still completely fits his own visual style. And there's something really charming about watching the ruffled fur on these characters, because doing fur and stop motion is just an animator's worst nightmare, because whenever you were to, if you take the head of Fantastic Mr. Fox and you move it slightly, if you move his head to the right, your fingerprints are going to be moving the hairs on his head. There's nothing you can do about it. Continuity is just never going to be consistent. But for this film, they just thought, whatever, just have his hair move as he moves his head. And there's something almost hypnotic about that. There's something really, really appealing about just the way these characters move. And it's not exactly as fluid as many other stop-motion animation films like I mentioned, but it does have that tactile feel, the real fur on these characters and the real mud that they're digging through. It is just a really charming film from a really great story, and it's one of those films where if you watch the trailer and then watch the film, you realise whether or not this is for you. But for me, as based off a book that I really, really enjoy, and someone whose aesthetics I really enjoy as well, the two feel like they shouldn't fit together, but they actually do, and I really appreciate Fantastic Mr. Fox by Wes Anderson. And also apparently Henry Selick was an inspiration to Wes Anderson, the director of Nightmare Before Christmas, because they worked together. They started developing this like 10 years before it got made, but then the production company just fell apart, and then Selick went on to create Coraline through Leica Animation, and then Wes Anderson just took those base ideas that him and Selick developed and just made Fantastic Mr. Fox. So even when I'm not talking about Henry Selick film, Henry Selick's influence is still definitely felt. And speaking of Coraline and Leica Animation, we're going to number 2, which is Kubo and the Two Strings. Now, I've only seen this a week ago, and I have no qualms of saying this is one of the best stop-motion animated movies of all time. Now, Leica Animation have done some great films in the past. I'm a big fan of Coraline, and I'm also a big fan of the Box Trolls. I wasn't huge on Paranorman. I felt that Paranorman had pretty stock and cliche characters, and because we spent so much time with those characters, it just wasn't as engaging as it should be. But the story itself was really great in the second half, and the last 20 minutes, how the climax of the film is just a conversation, and I love how brave and quiet the ending of Paranorman is. I don't rate the rest of it as highly, but the last 20 minutes are absolutely outstanding in my opinion. And Kubo and the Two Strings is if you took those last 20 minutes and made them over 100 minutes long, and just expanded it and expanded everything that Paranorman was trying to say. And this is the longest stop-motion animated movie of all time, at 102 minutes. That's pretty outstanding. That the longest stop-motion animated film is only 100 minutes long. I say only, still a long time, kind of, maybe, but it just speaks to the ambition of Leica Animation, who all of their films have had a production budget of $60 million, and yet Kubo and the Two String, it feels like 2 or 3 times the scale and the scope of their previous films. This is Leica Animation's first big blockbuster. Now, the story is that Kubo is a young boy who, him and his sick mother have escaped from their grandfather and their 2 sisters after the death of their father, because they're trying to steal his eye. They've already taken one of his eyes. That's why he's wearing an eye patch, and their grandfather and his mother's sisters want to steal the other eye for some nefarious purposes. So they are hiding out in an old village, and they're eventually found. And Kubo is saved by his mother and is whisked away to try and escape. And on his journeys, he meets a monkey and a samurai who's been turned into a beetle, and they have to assemble this. They have to put together this suit. They have to find a sword, a helmet, and a breastplate in order to create a suit of armor in order to fight and defend the village from his grandfather. And it's a story that is steeped in Eastern mythology and in Eastern conventions, and the aesthetics completely reflect that. But the aesthetics go much further than just the Eastern influences. There's a recurring motif that one of Kubo's powers is that he's able to play an instrument. A shamisen, which it's called, but it's more like a lute. It's a 3-stringed guitar, essentially. I'm probably just butchering Eastern mythology here. But whenever he plays it, he's able to magically manipulate pieces of paper that form into origami people, origami beasts, and origami birds, and all insects, and all. He's able to manipulate paper with this guitar. And as a result, a lot of the scenery looks like it was built from origami. It's got those angular shapes, it's got those angles. Like even the mountain where Kubo and his mother are staying in order to hide from their family, it's triangular shaped. It's like an off-center pyramid. It looks like an origami world, and even just some of the character designs and their armor and their facial structure and the buildings, it looks like it was built out of origami, but the details are there. The shapes are origami, but the textures and the details are very much in keeping with a real world and also Eastern aesthetic in this mythological feel. The cast is terrific. We've got Art Parkinson as Kubo, Charlize Theron as the monkey, Matthew McConaughey as Beetle, Rooney Mara as the sisters, and the sisters are creepy as hell, and I can bet that the sisters are going to be a Halloween costume staple for years to come, because those are some awesome designs and costumes, because the design of the world is terrific. And the film, thematically, that I have the most comparisons with is actually The Book of Life, which was a 2014 animated film. It was produced by Guillermo del Toro, and it's basically a movie all about the Mexican Day of the Dead. And what they believe in the Day of the Dead is that whenever somebody dies, their spirit goes somewhere else. They go to a really luxurious afterlife, and as long as people remember who these people are, remember things about them, then they'll stay in that afterlife forever, and the afterlife is going to be wonderful and peaceful for them. But as soon as they're forgotten, as soon as nobody living remembers who they are, then they go to a different plane of existence. They kind of cease to be. That's the broad, simplistic way to describe the Mexican afterlife. But what happens is that the Book of Life is all about that, and it's encouraging people to remember those who have come before you, remember previous generations, and remember their tales and their experiences. And Kubo and the Two Strings kind of it doesn't have that afterlife concept, but it's all about remembering people who have come before you and telling tales. It's all about telling stories. It's all about mythology, and also how that can personally resonate with you and family members who have been involved in this. It's about so much, but it's kind of got a really simple story at its center. It's really profound in that way. The climax is brilliant as well. The action is absolutely amazing. It's probably the fight I was on about earlier on the boat that took 19 months to animate between Monkey and one of the sisters is possibly the greatest action sequence ever done in stop motion. And there's a moment in the credits. During the film, they fight a giant skeleton, and it's a giant stop motion puppet. It is the biggest stop motion thing ever animated. It's the biggest thing. And Leica Animation, they could have just CGI'd it. They could have done it, but they built a puppet. Why? Because they could. And there's a time-lapse sequence, a stop-motion time-lapse sequence halfway during the credits where they show this creature moving and being animated by a huge team of people. And if you've got anyone, if you take someone to see this movie who's under the age of, 10, make them watch that sequence. Make them sit through the credits and watch that time-lapse stop-motion sequence, because that is a sequence where I can genuinely imagine in maybe 15, 20, 25 years' time, future stop-motion animators saying, the ending of Kubo and the Two Strings and that time-lapse sequence is what got me into animation. It's what inspired me to get into stop-motion animation. It's a wonderful cherry on top of what is already a fantastic, masterful movie, because it's interesting if you should even consider Kubo and the Two Strings stop motion, because there's a lot of green screen in this film. There are some moments of CGI animation, and also it's not claymation. It's 3D printing where they kind of animate the movie ahead of time in a computer, and then they get at least the facial expressions, and then they 3D print these faces, and then every frame they put a different face on this model. But whether or not this is claymation or whatever, even if you could say it was not stop motion animation, there's an argument to be made for it. I'd say it counts as stop motion still, because it does have that. These are still models that are being moved frame by frame. But if you could make an argument, it's hard to deny that Kubo and the Two Strings is still just a masterful piece of animation. Even if it isn't stop motion, it is just masterful animation, and is one of the greatest stop motion movies of all time. But I think I'm going to be so predictable with my number one choice, but I still think that the pinnacle of the stop motion genre is from the company who popularized it and made it mainstream. It is Aardman Animation's Wallace and Gromit: The Curse of the Were-Rabbit. I love this movie. This is one of the reasons I got into filmmaking, because I remember me and my friend James, when this film came out in 2005, we watched Wallace and Gromit: The Curse of the Were-Rabbit, and then all we wanted to do for the rest of the summer, I believe it was a summer movie, it was actually, throughout the winter months, this came out in October 2005, so it wasn't the summer, it was the winter, but all we wanted to do for months after watching this film was just to make stop motion films. We just wanted to create and craft and animate and tell our own stories, and it was really the first movie that made me feel like that. Because I was only, I was 13 when this film came out, and this was the film that made me kind of want to get into filmmaking. And after that sort of stop motion craze had died after a couple of months, that love came back in 2008, 2009 when I started growing up, becoming older and more mature, and just watching films again and just wanting to get into that again. But Curse of the Were-Rabbit was that spark for me, which is why I've rated it so highly. I'm sure lots of people will have a very, very different number one, whether it is Kubo and the Two Strings, or maybe Coraline, or maybe Nightmare Before Christmas, or Frankenweenie, or Chicken Run, or whatever, or The Pirates and Adventurous Scientists, which is also a fantastic Aardman movie, or Shaun the Sheep the movie, which is another fantastic Aardman movie. These guys just hit out of the park every time, but for me, their magnum opus is Wallace and Gromit: The Curse of the Were-Rabbit. It is very British, it is quintessentially British, but it still has that wonderful, charming, quirky feel from the 30-minute Wallace and Gromit shorts. Everything from a grande out to The Wrong Trousers, A Close Shave, and even A Matter of Loaf and Death, which came out for 3 or 4 years after this film. That feel is still there. It doesn't jump the shark. It doesn't abandon its own roots. This is just a perfect theatrical, ambitious extension of what has already come before. And it's great that even after The Curse of the Were-Rabbit, this just feels like another day in the life of Wallace and Gromit, how they can still do A Matter of Loaf and Death and not need to try and top themselves, try and go even bigger than they did before. And you've even got some big name actors in this, like Ray Fiennes, Helena Bonham Carter, and Peter Kay rounding out this cast. It's a great cast in this film, and also just some great characters who we have never seen again. I think there may have been a picture of Lord Tottington in A Matter of Loaf and Death, but for the most part, this is just another day in the life of Wallace and Gromit, and I think as an extension of the series, it's maybe better than a film in its own right, but as part of a Wallace and Gromit saga, it fits in wonderfully. This won the Academy Award for Best Animated Feature, really deservedly so, and I think DreamWorks were a great company to pick up this sort of quirky, offbeat mantle for Wallace and Gromit when it came to their feature film debut. Peter Sallis is just... It just feels like I'm just saying what's great about Wallace and Gromit. The detailed sets, the charming British nature, just how wonderful Wallace and Gromit as a duo work off each other. But it's just made slightly bigger. It's bigger, it's longer, it never wears out its welcome. Nick Park and co-director Steve Box just did a wonderful job. Probably the biggest thing about this film is the music by Hans Zimmer and Julian Knott, because they do bring in a choir, they do bring in some massive orchestrations, and the score is great as well. I've not even talked about the plot. Basically, Wallace and Gromit have started up a pest control business for rabbits because there's a huge vegetable fair, a huge competition coming up in the coming weeks, and all of their carrots and their cucumbers and their vegetables and everything, their crops are being attacked by these evil rabbits. Well, they're not evil rabbits, they're just rabbits who just are cheeky and they just want to eat stuff. These are the minions before the minions came around. And what happens is that in order to try and brainwash the rabbits into getting rid of their appetite for vegetables, Wallace and Gromit create something even more dangerous, a were-rabbit, a gigantic 10-foot tall rabbit who has an insatiable appetite and will eat everything in its path, and Wallace and Gromit have to stop it. It's just a really funny play on Universal monster films and just a monster movie. It plays with all of these genre conventions. There's a bit of King Kong in there as well. There's so many different genres at play here, but they all fit seamlessly together in this really universal story about this small town under siege by a gigantic rabbit. It's a tale as old as time, but in the Wallace and Gromit coat of paint and with everything that Aardman give it, it's just so... I love it. I love this movie. I think Wallace and Gromit: The Curse of the Were-Rabbit is the best stop-motion animated film of all time, and I have no qualms with that. Maybe it's kind of my obligation to say that as a British gentleman, but whatever, I don't care. Wallace and Gromit: The Curse of the Were-Rabbit is top-notch filmmaking. I just love it to death. Okay, now it's time for my next segment, Blu-ray or DVD of the week, and this is a pretty special one. This is The Martian. Now, why am I talking about The Martian, you may ask? This came out on DVD and Blu-ray months ago. Well, this is the extended edition. This has got about 10-15 minutes added on to the original 10 out of 10 movie. One of my favourite movies of 2015. A brilliant science fiction masterpiece, if you can call it science fiction, because it really keeps the scientific accuracy a priority throughout. Matt Damon is absolutely terrific in The Martian, where he plays Mark Watney. He is a guy who, he's a botanist who was left behind when there's a storm on Mars and his team leave without him. He's presumed dead, but he's able to go to his Martian base, and he's able to somehow survive for a long time, but they've got to try and get him out. They've got to save him from Mars before he either starves to death or just dies. And it's just an incredibly human story. It's a story about coming together. It's showing the best of humanity. It's all about optimism. And it's just one of the smartest, one of the most fun, and just one of the most emotional movies I've seen in a long time. It's a film that will make you laugh out loud and make you laugh hard. But it will also make you cry or make you just really find yourself attached to this character. And it's not just him on Mars for 2 hours. There's also a lot of stuff with Chiwetel Ejiofor and Jeff Daniels and Kristen Wiig on Earth in NASA, trying to concoct a scheme or a plan to get him back alive. And it's just so engaging how these two dueling narratives can complement each other, and how when they do manage to communicate with each other, just everything that happens between the two is just the two sides is just electric. And The Martian Extended Edition, even though it's my Blu-ray of the week, this is a 10 out of 10 film even before you add more material onto it. I personally do not think, this is a Zavi Steelbook, by the way, even before the stuff, it's just a brilliant film anyway, but I think the additions Don't add much. I'm just going to say that up front. Only get this if you do not already own The Martian on DVD or Blu-ray. I think maybe if you were to just want to watch the film, just watch the normal cut first, and if you just love the film as much as I do, maybe check out the extended version as a curiosity. Because there's really not a lot here. There's a couple of scenes of Mark Watney on Mars still trying to collect some soil samples and just still try and do some scientific research while he's on Mars. He's got nothing better to do. There's a few scenes back on NASA when they're still where a little bit in regards to some more. There's one scene where Kristen Wiig is talking about her two ex-husbands, and there's also Donald Glover explaining more the intricacies of his plan, and there's maybe a couple more scenes of just solitude on Mars with Mark Watney and Matt Damon, but really there's not much here that's going to redefine your experiences. You're still just going to love the film. There's just maybe a little bit more of it. There's maybe a little bit more atmosphere, so maybe the extended cut is not the one to dive into because it makes it a more slower experience, and I think The Martian anyway is just perfectly paced. I can't really recommend the extended cut as the definitive version. I still think that the original version is just still top-notch and brilliant in every single regard, and it's mainly Drew Goddard's script that makes it work. Ridley Scott may be the director, but he came on very, very late in the process. So he kind of looked into this wonderful material that was already there and just begging to be made, and he was able to get it out there and make it amazing, but that the roots were not his, and I think this is Drew Goddard's movie, as well as Matt Damon's movie. I think he should have won the Best Actor award at the Academy Awards last year. He gave far and away the best performance of the year, way better than Leonardo DiCaprio, because he is basically playing the same role that DiCaprio played in The Revenant, where he is trapped and he's alone, he's trapped, he's got basically no hope of rescue, he's got to do these survival skills. But what happens is that in The Martian, there's an actual character there. There's someone with peaks and valleys, with hope as well as despair, with just the gamut of emotions, whereas DiCaprio's just sad the whole time. There's no variety to DiCaprio's performance. There's just pure suffering, and I think it's boring, and it's easy to do. It's easy to just stay on one note throughout an entire film, comparatively, I should say. It's comparatively easy to just be sad throughout a 2.5 hour film than it is to have all of these different emotions and just make them work in 2.5 hours like Matt Damon does. He's absolutely outstanding in this film. It is the performance of his career, and The Martian is a wonderful film, even before you get to the extended edition, which I think is still a great film. I just don't think it's worth seeking out the extended edition as an essential extension of the 10 out of 10 film that it already is. So that's my DVD Blu-ray of the week, The Martian Extended Edition, the Steelbook from Zavvi, or you can just get a normal conventional version for like £15 at your average retailer. Whatever, that works out. I'm not sponsored by Zavvi, I just love their steelbooks. So anyway, let's get to listener patron questions. So I may have to just go through these a little bit quick because I've got to pick somebody up in like 20-25 minutes, but either way, so let's go to our first patron, Dean Jones. I know the podcast is called Film Brits, but I have a Doctor Who question this week. With Stephen Moffat departing as showrunner in 2017, do you think he will/should write as a series regular under Chris Chibnall, much like the RTD years? I'm not sure that he will, considering he's been in Doctor Who stories since 2005, but who knows, maybe the old Moffat magic could come back. Or he also says, my favourite stop-motion animations are the Wallace and Gromit films. I'm presuming he means the shorts, but hopefully he loves Curse of the Were-Rabbit too. Let me know, Dean, because that was my number one. So if you don't like it, falling out with you. So, yeah, I think this is an interesting Doctor Who-related question. I think that Steve Moffat maybe should take a year or two out, distance himself from Doctor Who. And if he wants to come back, yeah, let him write a script. Maybe let him write a two-parter, a standalone story, whatever, because I think when the Rusty Davies era was in full swing, he was the writer who stood out year after year. He wrote Girl in the Fireplace, The Empty Child, The Doctor Dances, Silence in the Library, Forest of the Dead, Blink. He wrote some of the most highly regarded stories of the Rusty Davies era. And so when he took over as the head writer, it was a no-brainer. When people were saying who should take over after Rusty Davies, everyone was saying Stephen Moffat. He was the no-brainer choice. But under the Stephen Moffat era, there is no obvious choice to take over. Like, Chris Chibnall would have been the writer I would have chosen, but I really didn't consider him because he had not written for the programme for like 3 or 4 years before the announcement came out. There was no one writer who stood out outside of Stephen Moffat because the the writing staff were rotating so much and writers would come and go, which meant it was harder to hone in on one consistently brilliant writer throughout 4 or 5 years, like Stephen Moffat did. He consistently wrote for 4 seasons. But I think he should come back and write. I think he should, if he wants to, of course, that he should not be obligated to. If he feels like he has a story to tell after he's distanced himself from the program for a couple of years, just a standalone story that does not have a serious long arc, that does not have world-ending implications for the Doctor and his companion. If he can just tell a great standalone science fiction story in 45 minutes or 30 minutes if it's a 2-parter, if he wants to do it, I would absolutely give him the benefit of the doubt. If he got some distance between the program, yeah, absolutely. I would love to see him come back, and I'd love to just see what he can, if he can still deliver. Because I think he can. If he's just given more restraint, I think he absolutely can deliver. So that's the answer to that question, really. I think he should come back, and I think the Moffat magic is there. It will just have to be in smaller doses. So, question from George. Hi Trilbee, I recently noticed on Zavi that Disney will be releasing some of their films as big sleeve editions, which are essentially Blu-ray and DVD combo packs packaged in vinyl style sleeves instead of cases with exclusive art cards. Are you a collector of DVDs and Blu-rays? What do you think of the idea of DVDs and Blu-rays sold in collectors' vinyl cases? Do you think these big sleeve editions will help build interest in physical media for films? He also has a second message. As for favourite stop-motion animated films, mine would probably be Wallace and Gromit: The Wrong Trousers. Very charming and nostalgic short film for me, though close contenders would be Nightmare Before Christmas, Coraline, and, if it counts, the Lego Movie. I don't count the Lego Movie, but I love how it emulated a stop-motion style. I loved how it was deliberately slightly jerky movements, and it felt like it was a stop-motion film. I remember when the first trailer for the Lego Movie came out, people were asking, is this stop-motion? Which just showed how committed they were to the Lego aesthetic. And Coraline is a great film as well. Really enjoyed that. And Nightmare Before Christmas, that was on my list. So as for the collector's editions for DVDs and Blu-rays, I'm a sucker for a slipcase. And I love steelbooks, but I'll only buy steelbooks or special packaging editions for films I unabashedly love. Like, I only own like 3 steelbooks. Maybe I might own a DVD steelbook, but as for Blu-ray steelbooks, I only own The Martian, Captain America Civil War, and the Lego Movie. These are 10 out of 10 films for me. That is basically, a steelbook for a 10 out of 10 film is what will get me to drop my cash. Like, for example, there's a steelbook coming out for The Shallows. I like the film a lot. I think it's a great film. I don't love The Shallows enough to drop an extra £10 for a steelbook. I don't love it that much. That's basically what will get me to drop my money for it. But if I were to buy a Blu-ray, I'd love to just get it. I love slipcases. I love them. I don't know why. I just see the Blu-ray box and I just see the weird transparent blue and the label that seems almost stuck on around this blue plastic case. And it just looks a bit weird. I'm not a big fan of the Blu-ray box, but then when you put a slipcase over it, it just looks a lot cleaner. It just looks a lot tidier. It looks better on a shelf. It looks like a better presentation, and you just get the sharp focus of the image printed on this box as opposed to printed on a piece of paper or whatever material it is, and then underneath a plastic sheen. I think you lose something. It just looks better in a sleeve. So if I'm, for example, I want to buy the Babadook on DVD. And there's one shop nearby that sells the Blu-ray just in the conventional packaging. But there's also a shop that's maybe 10-15 minutes down the road that sells it in the cardboard slipcase. When I do buy with the Babadook, that's where I'm buying it from. It's the same price, I just feel like I'm maybe getting a bit more from it. I don't know. I'm really awkward like that. But as for these big sleeve editions, I'm going to look these up real quick. Big sleeve editions for Disney films on Zavi. I remember Zavi being a small retailer as well. I'm glad that they've moved online. Disney Big Sleeve. Let's take a look. I probably should have looked at this beforehand, but oh, there's actually a news story about it. Zavi announces Disney Big Sleeve movie editions. I'll answer the second part of the question while this loads. I'm not really a collector of DVDs and Blu-rays. I'll buy a Blu-ray because my partner and I moved in a few months ago, and she brought her Blu-ray player with her, so now I buy Blu-rays. I'm not really a collector. I think if a film got more than 4 stars, for me personally, then I'll probably get the Blu-ray for it. But, I'm looking at these now. I'll have a picture of this one in the corner of the screen. This is the Guardians of the Galaxy thing. My god, DVD version of the movie, Blu-ray version of the movie, 12-inch exclusive art print, stunning big sleeve packaging. Where am I going to store these things? Okay, and they've announced Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, Star Wars The Force Awakens, Guardians of the Galaxy, Cinderella, the remake, and Finding Dory. It's a Zavvi UK exclusive and you can pre-order. Why have they not attached, like, the soundtrack to this? Like, if it's coming in a big vinyl packaging, shouldn't they maybe put the CD of the soundtrack in there, or better yet, the actual vinyl? I feel like it's a little bit much. I love Guardians of the Galaxy. I don't see myself getting this. I think they're a little bit extravagant, for me at least. I don't really see... I'll maybe have to look at it in person. Maybe if it just does look like it's maybe in a flimsy vinyl case that will probably break apart if it stays on a shelf for too long. If the packaging seems sturdy, maybe, but I just think that if you're going to be having a packaging that big, a big vinyl packet, have more in it. And maybe I'll just need to look at the price for this thing. Zavvi Big Sleeve Editions. Let's just have a look at this. All titles Zavvi. Ooh. It's only £20. I was thinking it would be maybe £30-35, but once again, it would have to be whether or not I thought that the film itself was worth it. Like, I'm not a big enough Star Wars fan to get this big sleeve edition of Star Wars The Force Awakens. Maybe something like Beauty and the Beast, which I personally consider to be the greatest animated film of all time. Maybe. But if you pre-order, you get £10 off the price. So it is actually £30. I need more convincing. I think they should put something else in there. Put the soundtrack in there. Maybe have a poster in there. I just think that it's missing one thing. It's missing one thing to really just make this a package worthwhile, because it's going to be twice the price of your standard priced Blu-ray. It comes with a Blu-ray and a DVD. Why do you have a DVD version of the movie? Unless it's just about trying to get people who are into DVDs. But if you're just into DVDs, maybe you don't have the disposable income for something like this. It just feels like an exclusive edition for the sake of an exclusive edition. I'd have to take a look at it, but that's my weird roundabout answer to that, George. So thank you for bringing that to my attention. And also the final Patreon question comes from Winter. If you had to make a movie based on a video game property, what franchise would you use and what would the plot focus on? As for stop motion films, I'm not really one for the Burton films, but it's hard to go wrong with Aardman properties like Chicken Run. It's really hard to go wrong with Aardman. Fly. Yeah. That will help me sync up the audio, at least that clap. But yeah, video game property, what franchise would you use? I still think that going for a property like The Legend of Zelda would just be incredibly ideal. You would basically have a family-friendly Game of Thrones, and I think maybe going for the story like the Ocarina of Time. It's a great story. It's a story about growing up and just this kid goes on a magical adventure. And he fights a few beasts and he has a fun time, or what, and he gathers these orbs together, and then he goes to the Temple of Time, and then it turns out that this plan was orchestrated by a great evil, and he's locked away for 7 years. He's sent forward in time 7 years, and then he steps out the Temple of Time, and the world is nothing like he imagined it. It's nothing like he remembered it being. Many of his friends are dead. The clock town that used to be full of life and enthusiasm is now just perpetually dark and full of zombies. I think there's so much at play here visually, and if you can make Link maybe a more personable character, not just someone who is an avatar for the player, but maybe a genuine character in his own right, and someone who you grow attached to, and you love the world he inhabits. You make it a really fun first act, or a really fun first half, and then you pull the rug from underneath him and the audience and turn everything dark, and he cannot go back and change those 7 years. That 7 years is locked in. He can go back to the past, and I think maybe you could even do something in the third act where he thinks, no, I'm just going to stay in the past. I'm going to stay as a kid. But then he realizes, no, because this is not the world it's not going to stay like this. He needs to go back into the future, and he needs to save the world and fix it from scratch. There's no stopping this apocalypse that's going to happen, because those 7 years he jumps forward is locked in now. And I think there's a lot emotionally at play here. It might need to be quite a long film if you really want to make the audience invest and feel entertained by the first act, and then really drag them down for the second act. And then the third act is that him trying to defeat Ganon and save the world. It's going to be a long film. But I think it needs to be a film for the budget. You can't really do a story of this scale on a Netflix budget. But I think that is the film. I think that's it. And then if you wanted to do a sequel, then you could go back to Majora's Mask. And I think... Oh, and also the ending of Ocarina of Time is amazing as well, because what you could do is that he accepts that he's going to be losing his childhood. He loses his childhood in order to save the world. And I think that's a wonderful lesson for the protagonist to learn. And then at the end, right, he's accepted that. He's locked into that idea. That's what he's going to do. He is becoming the hero by sacrificing his childhood. And then once he saves Zelda, she gives him back that childhood. Like, she saves him. And I think it's a wonderful ending. As long as it's not like, oh, I'm going to save the world only if you give me my childhood back. I think that really undercuts that ending. But if he fully embraces his role as the hero and gives up his childhood, and then Zelda gives it back to him, I think that is having your cake and eating it too. I think that is letting the hero, be the selfless hero of time. And he also gets a happy ending. I think it's I'm getting chills thinking about this. This is a wonderful idea for a film, if I do say so myself. But it's based off one of the greatest video game stories of all time, the Ocarina of Time. I think it's... Yeah, that is the movie. That's the property. That is the plot. I'm going for The Legend of Zelda, and you adapt the Ocarina of Time. And then you could do sequels for Majora's Mask. There we go. Okay, so... let's go to the Twitter lightning round. And if you want to know how to get questions, for the Patreon questions where I give in-depth answers to, you have to be a patron. You have to pay above a certain bracket, and then you can influence the topics, and you can influence the questions that I answer, and the discussions. So I'd massively appreciate it if you could support me on www.patreon.com/Trilbee. Now let's get to the Twitter lightning round. Now, I'm recording this on a Wednesday afternoon. It's pretty late because this is another late podcast, unfortunately, because... blame the Movie Mania podcast for that, because I had to watch all of Luke Cage, I had to watch all of Stranger Things. I didn't really have much time to podcast, and then I had to record that podcast the other night. So, and also yesterday I was at work all day. So, anyway, let's get to the Twitter lightning round. Basically, on Twitter, I just ask for some questions that I'm going to be answering in 60 seconds. I will be timing myself on my phone. 60-second questions, not many because it's a Wednesday afternoon, understandably. But okay, here we go. Twitter lightning round. 1, 2, 3, go. Okay, Castleman asks, have you seen what Bandit looks like? He presumably means Bandit Incorporated from the Movie Mania podcast. I have not seen him. I do not even know his real name. He's a very private guy because he understands that if you have controversial opinions or any opinion on the internet, then people will try and dox you. They'll try and figure out your right. If they know your name, if they know where you live. All I know is that he's from Australia. He likes movies. That's really all I know about Bandit. He is kind of an enigma, so I have not seen what he looks like. I joke that he actually does look like that cat with sunglasses with a rainbow perpetually through them, but I do not know what he looks like. Okay, so next question comes from Richard McGee. He's going to take a drink. My coffee's gone cold. Okay. 3, 2, 1, go. What are your thoughts on Guy Ritchie possibly directing a live-action remake of Aladdin for Disney? Oh boy, I think Disney, what they're thinking is that, okay, we've had Cinderella, we've had The Jungle Book, we're going to have Beauty and the Beast and the Lion King. We need to make one of these suck. We need to make one of these bomb at the box office. Otherwise, people would just get too suspicious. I think Guy Ritchie is... he's a great director. I really do think he's a great director. I love his Sherlock Holmes films. I do love Snatch. But I don't think he's right for the material. I think he's going to Guy Ritchie the material, which is, it's a good thing for a director to have their stamp on it. But we don't remember Aladdin because it's a Guy Ritchie film. We remember it because it's got great characters and it's got a great sensibility and it's got these songs and everything. I think Guy Ritchie is not compatible with that material. They could make it work. They could Ritchie or Snatch up Aladdin. I'd need to see a trailer. I'd need to know who they're casting and I need to know who is also writing it. Okay. So let's go for the final question. Like I said, not many because that coffee has really made me mouth gassy. Not many questions because it's a Wednesday afternoon, but I also need to be heading off in a few minutes, and we're nearly at, we've gone over 15 minutes, and I tried to keep these underneath 1 hour. So, final question comes from Jerome Giorlando. Can you name 5 positives for The Amazing Spider-Man 2? I can't. I want to see if you can. Okay. 5 positive. I gave the film a 0 out of 10. And I don't use that lightly. I never give a film a 0 out of 10 unless I can think of, like, there's something worthwhile in it. Like, for example, I never gave Twilight Breaking Dawn Part 1 a 0 out of 10 because it had the fun police chief dad who seems to know he's in a terrible film. He was this, but 5 positives. Okay, the suit looks good. The Spider-Man suit looks good. Although it's the suit, like, everything good about the film is something that the Sam Raimi films have either done before or done better. Like, the swinging is good, the costume's good, but we've had that from the Sam Raimi film. I can't. The stunt work is good, I guess. I guess the stunt team did a good job. That's my minute. I named 3, and those are just 3 things that the Sam Raimi films have already done. It's probably one of the reasons I was so harsh on those films, because even the few positive things that they do have been done better before. This is not like Fantastic Four, where the template has not yet been established, so it kind of makes sense why it's another bad film. The template is there. It's been done. It's been great before, so you have no excuse for that. So there we go, that's it. That's the Film Brits podcast. Thank you so much for listening or so much for watching. Like I said, you can watch this on YouTube or listen to it on iTunes or on SoundCloud. And if you are listening to this on iTunes, be sure to rate the podcast. That would be fantastic as well. Thank you so much for listening or watching. What are your favourite stop motion movies? Or do you have anything to add about any of these topics or discussions? So please talk in the comment section below. I will be there. I'll be watching and listening and commenting and responding. So thank you so much for listening. My name is Trilbee. If you'd like to support the Film Brits podcast, you can do so on Patreon at www.patreon.com/Trilbee, where we have some rewards tiers, which also keeps the lights on here. I'd massively appreciate it. So thank you so much for listening or watching, and I shall see you folks next time.